This is a talk for the Canadian MSF Mapathon in early December 2016 as an introduction to Missing Maps activity in the post-Ebola West African GIS border mapping project. Any information can be got from the missingmaps.org website. Please do be in touch with comments or questions or means of getting involved. There's a piece of data right at the outset which is a useful illustration of any and all tools that are used in the field to create data. A signpost in a setting. The context is shown, the road conditions of population and also distances geotagged onto this image help us to cross-reference this. A little bit about me. My name is Rupert and I have a background as a tech log. So I do technical logistics for MSF, working with supply, making sure that medicine and nutrition, as well as logistics supplies and materials, can get to remote and difficult locations and be used appropriately, transported well, and then put into place either in the direct medical context, working with the cold chain and refrigerated vaccines, or working with water and sanitation, figuring out how to use local tools to address local problems and make sure that hospitals like this don't get flooded with contaminated water and that everybody is safe within the compound from disease, and that our projects are kept running. I work with generators and solar panels and water and pumps and construction also. Often, again, as I say, working in difficult situations with limited tools. Here's a great example. A hospital ward that we built in South Sudan. Our team put it together without using a tape measure. It's unfinished here, but it's fully used now and working every day, in fact overrun in a project in South Sudan. I got asked to get involved with the Missing Maps project 2 years ago, and I haven't really looked back since. It's really interesting for me with my engineering background and my interest in local field cultures and communities. It really combines the two, and this is me in April earlier on this year, with my field team leaders in Sierra Leone, introducing them to the project, the West Africa GIS mapping project. These guys here are the brightest and best in Sierra Leone, and they were there when Ebola was breaking out, and they were the guys who helped to stop it. Our project there in Sierra Leone, to start with, was in the border regions. We were looking for missing communities. We had around 1,200 communities logged down, 1,300 communities in Sierra Leone. Liberia and Guinea had similar amounts that we didn't have good data on, and then we also knew that there were several hundred more. We've actually, in the last 8 months, with the help of remote mappers like Mapathon volunteers and people on the ground, managed to map 3 times that number of communities, near enough. These guys here, motorcycle mappers using mobile phone apps, were deployed during the Ebola outbreak, and basically in the global north we owe our lives to these guys. They were some of the people who stopped it from coming to us, and they did it under these difficult conditions. They basically went out, somebody had a great idea that they could use a mobile phone just at least to tag villages where people were coming from, to give an idea when they turned up in the hospital where they'd come through with their contagion, who might have been affected, how it might be spreading. The terror that raged through Sierra Leone must have been horrific. I've had small inklings of this, but just the unknown fear of what the disease was, where it was coming from, where it was going to strike next, was exacerbated by the fact that there really wasn't any reliable information about the names of villages. People couldn't say what roads they'd used, and maps became an incredibly important tool very, very quickly that was missing. So the big project was to try and make maps happen. And they did start to happen. Here's a disaster that's happening, a small local disaster that happened to me while I was out remote supervising there in the border regions. I'm in the middle of nowhere, and of course it's all meaningless. Very difficult for me to really get a picture of what's going on. Until a map shows up. Suddenly we can strategize about how to solve the problem, where the nearest towns are, where the roads go. Even the basic information that we went into this project with that had been put together by remote mappers onto the OpenStreetMap. In this instance, clearly makes a huge difference to where you are, what you know is going on. Here are some photographs of geotag photographs of some of my data. But again, this kind of data is so important, shows road conditions, shows a geotag of what those conditions are like, and it can all be cross-referenced with the kind of size of the waterway as well. So you can get a real sense of how to intervene in times of crisis, and how people also might move around as a population, and what supplies might be able to be got to them. The border regions are very, very arbitrary. Here's obviously a straight line. The road stops back from the border. We went to the end of the road and met a border control there, and there it is tagged. The road continues, but we have no clue where it goes. The maps that we had initially were not showing that. Basically, these borders are just completely porous. They move around, and it's arbitrary where the signs go. Here was the sign for that border crossing, lying in the dust. So Mohammed Mara, one of my field team leaders, picked up and we took a photo of that, a geotagged photo, so that we can know where it is. But as I say, you can see the density of the bush behind, good enough to move through, good enough for cover. There's no way really that these borders have any purpose. The tribes and families exist across those borders, and the clans. So when people have family meetings or funerals of people who've died, then they're going to move across those borders. Mohammed Mara lives amongst those communities. Him and the other 4 field team leaders that I trained up during my time in Sierra Leone basically are part of the few people who managed to change how people thought about funerals during the Ebola crisis. Picture a scene where the family are used to getting very intimate with their body of their loved one. The moment of death is the most contagious moment that Ebola has as a disease, and when they lie down with the people in their grief, then they will become infected. Then they'll go back across those borders and back into their communities where there are no maps of the roads or the communities. The disease spreads like wildfire. Mohammed and his colleagues managed to stop this with a mobilization called Safe and Dignified Burial, where they changed the tradition of generations amongst these people, albeit temporarily, so that this wouldn't happen. People wouldn't get so close to bodies. And that ideological project to do with community diplomacy and mutual respect is such an incredibly difficult task to do. I have complete admiration for Mohammed and his colleagues for doing this project, and it's something where corresponding that kind of stuff to maps and epidemiology is a really incredible, magical thing to have done. Here's a border control, a classic. This is a very good, well-ordered one, but again, it's 10 kilometres back from the border here, and people can come through the bush, obviously, on either side, and do frequently. This is one of the main roads between the capitals of Freetown and Monrovia, and it goes and the road, you can see the road condition, you can see the struggle of how to maintain borders happening here. Mohammed and Victor, practicing the ODK, the Open Data Kit surveying tool that we taught them to do. My project was to teach, pass on the knowledge that I'd been passed on using mobile phone technology, smartphones is what these people are using, and the people that they are teaching, and those volunteers are actually teaching the people in their villages, the village chiefs, to use this technology to map themselves and their own village needs, their community needs. This particular one, collaboratively put together, it was a survey that I customised with help from my colleagues at American Red Cross and MSF. And then I took to the field and we changed to make sure that it was appropriate, the questions are appropriate, they're asking the right questions, and I also made sure the guys became aware of how they themselves could change the questions and the survey questions. We put a geotag in at the beginning of the survey, and we go on from there to represent that on a map. This is some of the communities we had that we had to start with, that we went looking for. It's the basis of our search. So this was some of the 1,300 or so, to which we've added so many more. A lot of these communities have either a location that's approximate or there's a name that's approximate, but at least there's something on a map. We use this as a basis for as a teaching aid, and this is so that people could see what we were trying to achieve. This is OpenStreetMap for Android here that we've installed on all of those guys' phones, and they each have a USB stick. They're basically very self-sufficient and tech savvy, remotely assisted using WhatsApp and email if possible, whatever multi-platform tool we've got to do workflows and troubleshooting. But these guys are getting better and better, and now they're starting to do that same practice themselves in the field. They wouldn't be able to do any of it if it weren't for the Mapathon volunteers. And here's one of the teaching kind of diagrams that I use, where we see a Mapathon happening. We see the trace layer getting built. This is Leone, so this is the official main town where Ebola entered into Sierra Leone, and we go in and we see the central mosque. We see the trace layer, and this can all be used by people in the field as a learning tool, whereby there's a Mapathon actually taking place in Zimbabwe, where we could use that information. Just to check here, again, if you've got any questions, do get in touch through missingmaps.org or msf.org.uk/missingmaps -project. Any questions so far, please write them down and get in touch. Going into the field, this is the map that you guys have made in Mapathons around the world, using OpenMapKit, field papers, Osmand, OpenStreetMap for Android, and ODK, Open Data Kit. The motorcycle mappers on their way out to the field, doing health centre surveys, doing community surveys. I really like this sign: free healthcare is a right and a responsibility, and so it should be. So here's Bentu again in the north, with Mohammed Mara and his sign there on the border. And this is how it was when I was there. Then yesterday I downloaded the new information on Bentu, and this is how it looks. You can look on OpenStreetMap yourselves, just look it up. The detail has suddenly multiplied. The roads go over the borders if you zoom out, which I can't do, it's a slide, but the information has absolutely multiplied. It's a proper intercultural collaboration of which we should all be really proud. And there's the health centre that shows up there. Here's another healthcare centre that I tagged. We're using Osmand here and uploading a note. All these guys in the field now are part of our community and have logins of their own, and they can go around, as can a lot of the other folk who they've been questioning, who've taken an interest. Tribal chiefs, village chiefs have all taken an interest in this, because we've gone in through the community entry mechanisms there of diplomacy. So you'd be surprised how many people are wandering around. These are the roads. This is the road that you just saw. So this is what they call the Guinea Highway. This goes into Guinea. It's another arterial route going to a major town, and this is as good as it gets. This is why the maps aren't in place, and this is why it's been so difficult to put them in place. Obviously, this is a Land Cruiser, the MSF vehicle of choice. It's the best off-road vehicle that you can get, basically, in the world, that's resilient and trustworthy, and also nimble enough. It struggled to get even down this road to the end this day. It actually catches us looking for Suleiman, who's another one of my field team leaders. This is deep into Tolly in the Kono district in Diamond Country, where we're trying to track him down and figure out where his volunteers are. There he is. We've just come across him. You'll see that barrier there. That's the local tax barrier. The villagers levy a local tax on these situations. This is a community entry moment where the elders are gathered round in the village, and we make sure that everyone knows what the project is, what it's about, and hopefully that will help them to understand how to use it on their own phone and become self-sufficient, doing their own mapping for their own needs. Seconds later, we have Solomon on the bonnet of the Land Cruiser with a printed out map. These are maps made up of what you guys in various mapathons have put together, using, again, pen and paper in this instance, to work out how we're going to get our coverage in these different sections of the chiefdom here. And there's the border. Tolly, as you can see, Tolly region stretches across the border, and Mafindor again, so we have to work out where our diplomacy works across that border, and what we want to cover. Here again is the incredible job done by field team leaders, the outreach work and the representation of the project on the ground, spreading the word. Again, the kind of community element of this is something that's easy to forget when we're sitting in a mapathon clicking on polygons. But without those polygons, these guys can't operate. The data in the local context helps us a lot. We can see here a great slide. If there's a flood or earthquake in this situation, natural disaster, the building, for instance, the building materials can now be logged. We asked for all sorts of vulnerability and medical information, which obviously is stored or used by the Red Cross specifically, and stored securely. That doesn't go on the OpenStreetMap. But from that information, we can work out a humanitarian perspective if we're called to act in that area. And that can be shared by humanitarian agencies, obviously with confidentiality in mind. But you can see now, if there's a poor building conditions in this part of a suburb, then we know that we need to go there first. The concrete buildings are probably not going to need so much attention as the building conditions here, the poor ones, which are more brick and no data, and some wood. So that's how to use some of this information. Here's an interesting survey I did. I used the drivers while my guys were out doing their team leader supervision in the field. I took some MSF drivers and installed the Open Data Kit app, the surveying app that you saw earlier, and the OpenStreetMap app. Of course, drivers really love that because it's an offline sat-nav, and they know sat-nav, but they've not ever been able to use it because they just don't have the network coverage. So here's a free sat-nav, and drivers often sitting around and waiting for stuff. They love to fiddle with mobile phones, so it's a great resource to use drivers for their own benefit and for our benefit. Here's a Waterpoint survey. One of the drivers found this well. So he did a survey on it, geotagged it, took a photograph. The survey tells us there were 300 people in that village. This is the only well, and obviously when you go up close you can see They're using it for washing as well as for water supply. Pretty bad, but acceptable enough. It overflows during rainy season was one of the questions we asked. It doesn't dry out during dry season, but the contamination element is potential there. We have it from our open data kit survey that the driver returned with. Then I asked them to do a different survey, a latrine survey. And when I put the data together in my Java OpenStreetMap editor that you can see here, which we use offline in the field a lot, I see another point nearby, another photograph. So the latrine survey, how many people that served and whether that overflows in rainy season. The questions were asked in the Open Data Kit, the ODK survey. Here's the latrine. Look how close to the well it is. You only need to overlay some cholera data or other data in the QGIS or any kind of analytic GIS software to realise the power of these data collection tools. The guys locally are realising, and they're in fact so nimble of mind that they can appropriate these skills really, really fast. There it is, in the middle of nowhere. Latrines in the jungle. Any questions? Thanks very much for listening. Here are some notes on why we did this project, what the purpose is. So whilst you have a quick look at them, I'll say again that if you do have any questions, please get in touch with the Missing Maps project or the MSF, www.msf.org.uk/missingmaps-project. So missingmaps.org is the alternative. Data will be freely available for anyone to use and update, will be used for making program decisions. Keep mapping, guys, and thank you for all your support. Hopefully you come from one of these communities, and if you don't, here's a map of where they are, and here's our hub in Gekadu that we've been building, whereby mapping can take place centred around this in West Africa now, run by the local communities there rather than by external NGOs. And if ever anyone asks, why do we need maps and aren't there any already? This is a heat map of where there are and where there aren't maps, and as you can see, there are massive areas of the world that are completely unmapped, and we're changing that. So thanks for listening, and do get in touch.